it available on multiple websites, in particular Plum Center, but also the Central Coast Regional Equity website. And also for folks who are here virtually via Zoom, please put your questions, comments, et cetera, in the chat so that we can, and Isaac will facilitate those as they come along at the end. And then the other thing I want to say is for all of those folks who chose at the last minute to go on Zoom rather than coming to the beautiful Annenberg room, there's a wonderful display of food that we're all going to enjoy. And I can say there's good booze, et cetera. You know what you're missing. Okay, anyway, I've met many of you who are online as well as everyone in the room. My name is Alice O'Connor. I am the director of the Plum Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Democracy here at UCSB, and I'm also a professor of history. I'm really pleased to be co-hosting this event about the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative with Marcos Vargas, who is the executive director of the Fund for Santa Barbara, and Charlie Hale, who is the Dean of Social Sciences. We have been partners all along the way and will continue to be in this initiative. Our aim here today is to introduce you to the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative, to offer a few highlights from our recently released study entitled Towards a Just and Equitable Central Coast. And especially, we want to let you know and get you interested in and encourage you to be part of the initiative, including by responding to, taking a look at, and hopefully responding to the call for proposals that we recently issued to conduct community engaged equity research in the Tri-County region of Santa Barbara, Ventura, and San Luis Obispo counties. I want to acknowledge that this region that we're studying and inhabiting and seeking to organize more democratically with this initiative, that this region occupies the unceded territories of the Chumash and Tatavian peoples, and that the initiative has been and will continue to work in alignment with the efforts of them and other indigenous peoples to achieve freedom and justice and full cultural recognition. I also want to acknowledge the essential contributions of several people in the room, both the Zoom room and here in the Annenberg room. First, I want to thank and recognize three members of our core team. Isaac Hale, who is joining us virtually and is facilitating the online conversation. Isaac Hale is the Equity Research Postdoctoral Scholar, and I'm very proud to say that he is soon to be an assistant professor in the Department of Politics at Occidental College. Yes, here. Thank you as well to Kathleen Knight, who is the Capacity Building Manager at the Fund for Santa Barbara. Wave to everybody in the room here. Recently joined, has been a galvanizing presence on the team. And Peyton Bivona, who is an undergraduate here at UCSB, the world's most amazing undergraduate and a capacity building intern at the Fund for Santa Barbara. So they've been fantastic in making this possible and continue to be. I also want to thank the UCSB faculty members who are on our steering committee for the report as well as for the larger initiative. Maria Charles, who is professor of sociology and director of the Broome Center here at UCSB. Amy Gonzalez, who is associate professor of communication, and Diane Fugino, who is professor of Asian American Studies. Again, all just essential co-collaborators on this project. And then real quick, I really want to give a big thanks to Keisha Arnold, Dr. Keisha Arnold, who is a history PhD, and she has recently assumed the responsibilities of the academic coordinator of the Plum Center. You've already heard a lot from Keisha because your inboxes have been filling up with messages from her. Okay, so I'm going to be talking in a minute, saying a bit more about the regional equity study and the broader initiative. But before I do that, I want to turn this over to Dean Charlie Hale, who is going to talk to us about where this fits in the broader aspirations of the social sciences at UCSB.
Oh, thank you, Alice.
Charlie, I think, would you mind, so the folks at home can, at home or wherever, in Zoom land.
All right. Thank you, Alice. Welcome, everyone. A warm, especially warm welcome to those who made it in person. The cookies are great. And also, of course, a welcome to those that are online. It's a really exciting achievement that the Plum Center has made together with the Fund for Santa Barbara to create this equity study. And I feel like in many ways it's the manifestation of the kinds of the values and the aspirations of the Division of Social Sciences. And I want to talk a little bit about that in relation to for what I would call aspirational pillars of our division. We believe in interdisciplinary research on high stakes social problems of our era. We try to encourage publicly facing research that engages multiple arenas outside of academia as well as inside academia, and using collaborative and often community engaged methods. We encourage experience-based pedagogy, learning by doing, putting our knowledge into practice. And finally, we have broader values that we affirm of intersectional justice and the principle of collective self-care, which means that we care about our own institution, how it does in terms of these values of intersectional justice, and also the communities that we're part of. And so the question is, if those are aspirational, to what extent we actually meet them here in the university? And there's no project that I can think of that hits those marks more fully than the regional equity study that you're about to hear about. It's a collective project. It's deeply collaborative between the university and community partners, and also with sister institutions of higher education around the region. Alice has already named a series of people that are very important to the project, and I want to affirm the congratulations and gratitude to all those people. And then a special shout out to Marcos Vargas and Alice O'Connor, who have just been amazing prime movers. In any collective, there are going to be some prime movers that are just keeping the collective going and keeping the effort going. And Marcos and Alice have been quite extraordinary in that regard. So just very quickly on these four aspirational principles of the division. High stakes social problems. There's no issue that's more pressing and has more multifaceted impact, negative impact in our society today, I would say, than the problem of inequity in all its dimensions. And that's really what this study is about. And as Alice, I'm sure, is going to point out, this region is an exaggerated, in some ways grotesque example of the kind of inequity that we're facing throughout the society and the globe. We need to be thinking critically about the way that social and economic inequity also is a corrosive influence on process of democracy and democratic participation, which is also, of course, a major theme of the Plum Center. And it's very important for us to put to develop this understanding in a way that connects with, it puts the knowledge in the hands of frontline actors who are really strategizing to make a difference. Secondly, publicly facing outcomes. This is a project that has been characterized by collaborative community engaged research from the start. In untold numbers of meetings with community stakeholders, trying to develop a kind of a methodology that would be truly collaborative and actually work for the university and also work for those that are participating from the community. And that's so important to model and to show the value of this kind of research in both its ethically affirming dimensions and also the fact that this kind of research actually produces insights, analytical insights that wouldn't be generated otherwise. It has scholarly as well as ethical and political impact. And finally, in this regard, it's very important. I see that I think Walid Afifi is on the saw his name somewhere. One of the things that we're very committed to in the division is making sure that this kind of research is also acknowledged and rewarded in the university. So there's incentives to do it and acknowledgement of the importance. And Walid has been the leader of a study that's looking specifically at how our merit and promotion system recognizes and rewards community engaged research. That's crucially important. Experience-based pedagogy, this is all about putting our knowledge generated through the regional equity study into practice. And the principle of collective self-care in intersectional justice is really about us thinking about ways that we can encourage not all research in the social sciences to be locally engaged, but for there to be encouragement for some percentage, some significant amount of the research, the amazing research that we do in this university, to actually connect with the communities that we live and to have an impact on the well-being and the quality of life in those communities. And that principle is amply demonstrated by the study as well. So it's an argument for localizing a part of what we do and to make the research, to drive the research engine in a way that engages the local dimensions of the issues we study. So I thought I made a quick list of the amazing research that's going on, and a couple examples that have exactly the kind of local reverberations, or could have, that we're talking about. Juanita Garcia in Chicano Studies, who studies the effect of being undocumented on family members, such an enormous issue here in the region. Clayton Nall in political science is working on housing crisis. Dana Kornberg in sociology is working on environmental justice. Ricardo Jacob in global studies is working on food insecurity. Amy Gonzalez on digital equity. Eric Campbell on language justice. Lisa Park on health justice and community. All those topics are central to the community equity, to the regional equity study. And all of them, some of them already have local dimensions, but all of them could, and there's many, many more. And so that's what we're trying to really encourage, is that local engagement that the community equity study will facilitate and push forward. So in conclusion, we're just getting started. This is a study, this is a process that's going to continue, that's going to be data collection and deepening of the work in a continuous way. We're very committed to that. And so we encourage everyone listening to think about encouraging your graduate students and your own research agendas to localize in that manner and to deepen your engagement with the amazing Plum Center. Thank you.
Charlie, thank you so much. I can think of no better way to encourage people to engage than the dean saying, we care. And also that, I really appreciate having the commitment. We all really appreciate having the commitment of the Division of Social Sciences and to have it be more than a rhetorical commitment. I mean, this is a commitment that has real meaning and is truly anchored, and also has the active involvement of the dean. And that's really, you can't ask for anything better than that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the initiative itself. I'll highlight a few things about the study that was released and that there's a link to in the call for proposals, just by way of introducing you to what the whole initiative is all about, but also getting us collectively to start talking about what it is that community engaged research looks like, why is it important, and how it can make a difference. And for that, I'm going to have help from colleagues here in the room. So the Regional Equity Initiative, it's the outgrowth of many years of social justice organizing and activism and learning that over the long haul has come to recognize and build on the regional nature of the macroeconomic and labor market, the housing, transportation, environmental, all these institutional dynamics that shape people's lives and opportunities in Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo counties. And now what we're trying to do with the initiative is build on those years, decades really, of experience and insight to advance, to say, how can we advance structurally transformative change? So it's also based on the recognition that systematic, ongoing, and community engaged research can play an essential role in that process, especially in light of the resources we have here at UCSB, but as Charlie mentioned, throughout the region, and that we really have the capacity to mobilize and work with. The more immediate momentum behind the initiative, though, it dates back to 2019, 2020, that year, yes. When we began to lay the groundwork for the regional equity study itself. That's when we started to team up with the Equity Research Institute at USC, which for the past decade and a half has been producing data-driven equity profiles of municipalities across the country. In the midst of that came 2020, the extraordinary moment of global pandemic and escalating consciousness of state-sanctioned racial violence and climate disaster that brought the urgency and consequences of long ignored structural inequities into sharp relief. And immediately, we began to reorient to say, we need to recognize this moment, and we need to be able to use this moment as an opportunity to push towards a transformative structural change. So that combination of research design and galvanizing life experience is reflected in this study entitled Towards a Just and Equitable Central Coast that was released in December. Oh, is this not advancing? There we go. That it was released in December 2021 and is a research and data-backed analysis and framework. I really want to underscore the framework part of that for understanding how inequities are structured, how they're rooted in policy and practice, as in they're not inevitabilities, and how we can work collectively towards structurally transformative change. The analysis itself is based on a combination of data drawn from the US Census, mostly from the American Community Study, data that's specific to California and the two counties of Ventura and Santa Barbara. I should note here, by the way, speaking of aspirations, as we continue with this project and update the data, it is our intention to include San Luis Obispo County in the larger study. It's just while we were getting going, we had to work within our capacity. In addition to these data, we convened a series of 16 community consultations, all convened via Zoom because they were convened at the height of the pandemic shutdown. And the purpose of those were to make this a collaborative initiative from the start, but also to hear from people about their priorities, about their experiences, their perceptions, and actually their lived reality of inequities. And especially to hear from them about the often unrecognized dimensions and consequences of inequality in community life. So it's a full report and you have access both to it and the executive summary. I want to invite you to read it. For now, I just want to highlight a few central framing points that we are at the core of the study. One is that the escalating inequality that now shapes the contemporary Central Coast has taken place in the context of profound and ongoing demographic change that anticipates what's happening throughout the United States, in that the Central Coast became majority BIPOC in the first decades of the 21st century, and will continue to become even more ethnically and racially diversified in coming decades. Second key framing point. Whoops, I want to go back one slide. Thank you. Did I did that. Okay, thank you, Keisha. Second is that escalating inequality is deeply, although by no means exclusively, rooted in the increasingly polarized economy that is an economy that's marked, again, in this very graphic slide, by gains at the very top of the distribution and declines in stagnation for the majority of workers who occupy the bottom through the middle, through up to the 80th% of the overall distribution. And I should say, I mean, this doesn't fully capture by any stretch of the imagination the degree of polarization, because we don't have access to the very top incomes here, nor does this reflect wealth inequities. And as we all know, and as have experienced, and is now beginning to be documented, all of these trends just, I mean, exploded during the time of pandemic. A third key framing point is that inequality is both intersectional across lines of race, gender, disability, age, citizenship status, but it's also multidimensional in the ways that disparities in employment, health, education, housing, environmental exposure, access to justice, interact with and compound one another. You can't isolate. There is no, single point. And there's that also means there's like no single point of leverage that's going to change everything else. So the region, and this, I just have one slide that gets some of this across, in that the region stands out not only for alarming and escalating trends reflected in labor market outcomes, but it stands out for its extreme rent burden and the just overwhelmingly inaccessible cost of housing, and for the degree to which these burdens fall disproportionately on communities of color. So if you see here how high, we stand very high on the rent burden scale, but that's a larger expression of the way in which we are at the front lines of inequality trends by all of these measures, and that's not something to be proud of. That's something that needs to change. These same, the housing inequities, the consequences of housing inequities also are compounded by the consequences of racially inequitable educational and criminal justice practices. Again, disproportionately affect lower income communities of color, but in fact, all communities of color in the region. And similarly, all of these are compounded as well by the host of environmental and climate hazards that stem from toxic energy sources, waste disposal, exposure to pesticides and pollution, and climate change. All things that we have for far too long ignored, although again, there's a reason why the people at the front lines of protest around these issues are diverse communities of color, and they've made a difference. But we all need to work together to do more. All of these inequities are compounded by structural inequities in political power, another point that we discuss in the report. And here again, this is but one possible indicator and dimension of the inequities in representation and political voice. Again, disparities in voter turnout are profoundly important, but they're especially important when it comes to local elections. This reflects voter turnout in national level elections. These numbers are actually these disparities are much more dramatic when it comes to local elections, where that really makes a difference. So the intersecting and multidimensional aspects of inequality are a key theme in the report that kind of structure the narrative of inequality as lived on the Central Coast. A fourth point of emphasis is that inequality comes at a very high price, as Charlie was mentioning before, absolutely a very high price to our democracy, to our civic life, and actually to our economic vitality, as we discuss in the report. And this, of course, as with everything else, falls disproportionately on the workers and communities that we rely on most heavily for the region's storied prosperity. I mean, I can't say that enough. We wouldn't be where we are, and we wouldn't be as proud of our prosperity were it not for the labor of the people who are suffering the consequences of inequality. So nowhere does this come through more starkly than in the disparate experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic, which disproportionately affected communities of color. Again, there are many data points that can that bear this out, but also were disproportionately affected precisely because they were also disproportionately exposed as frontline or suddenly deemed essential workers, who many studies here and elsewhere have shown were disproportionately vulnerable to infection and to the absence of adequate care, who were similarly, these communities, working class communities of color, were similarly at risk as occupants of overcrowded housing, itself a strategy for dealing with the escalating and out of reach costs of housing, communities who also lack access to adequate health care. Again, I'm just showing one data point that indicates an important dimension of inequities here in the case of the inadequate access to health insurance coverage, but there are many other data points, but also knowledge that we could bring to bear on these issues. And all of these very same communities are far more likely to lack full digital access, which, as we heard, as we know from experience, as I think all of us who taught during the pandemic, we don't need to be told how important full and adequate digital access is and what a vector of inequality it is. But that was reinforced in our community consultations, in that people talked about how this is a disparity that touches on access to healthcare, unemployment benefits, social services, but also to civic connectedness. That's a very big concern that we hope to learn more about in this initiative. Perhaps the most important point, though, to emphasize for today's purposes is that though the study itself delves into these and a range of other equity indicators, it's by no means exhaustive or definitive, and it's by no means meant to be. A number of issues came up in our research and community consultations that call for further exploration. And these are things that come from the experience of community organizations as well. I'm thinking about disparities in financing for K through 12 education, a really big issue of concern in the community that we didn't have the capacity to follow up with, but we want the initiative to be able to address these kinds of issues. The experience of youth in the carceral system, we touch upon it, but there's so much more to be learned and said. The gaping and racialized wealth gaps. I mean, we just got to find a way to get at that. We talk about it briefly in the report, especially with respect to home ownership, which is really where it makes a big difference, but there's so many other things to be understood about that. The gendered and racialized dynamics of the care economy in the region, a very, very big topic that we only touch on and that we want to invite others to join us in exploring further. So in that spirit of kind of laying the groundwork for ongoing collaboration, as opposed to pretending we have the answers, we end the report with a set of principles and priorities to guide the ongoing initiative, as opposed to a set of prescriptions for where to go. Now, there are 12 principles and priorities in all. I'm not going to go through all of them. I invite you to review them. They're in the executive summary, as well as in the report itself. But I do want to highlight a few of them. One is to respect the rights and experiences of Indigenous people from the starting point and throughout in everything that we do. A second key priority, we talk about centering equity and justice as foundational economic values. For too long, we have been told that, things, paying workers more is going to be counterproductive. It's going to, it's going to make for a slow growth economy. It's going to undermine our economic progress. Well, I think, the answer to that is actually to think about, what do we really value? What is an economy here to serve? Is the economy here to serve the values and principles of democracy, or the other way around? That's the kind of work that we'd like to be able to do with the help of collaborative and community engaged research. Now, why am I not, Keisha, can you, thank you. We elevate certain issues in our principles and priorities. One of them that we really wanted to elevate for further research, action, collaboration is housing. Partly because housing is one of those intersectional issues that hits us where inequality hits us where we live, but it also affects so many other dimensions of inequality. So we really wanted to elevate that as an area that's really fruitful for action and further research. And I want to give a shout out. We've been doing, the Plum Center has been hosting some online workshops on housing. And there's one tomorrow night at 5:30 that's going to focus on the UCSB housing crisis and what it means for the region. And then finally, and here's what the point I really wanted to end on. This is our aspiration. This is our vision for how this lasts and goes forward and becomes more than a report that sits on the shelf. This is how we make what we're learning and researching actionable. And that is building platforms, the infrastructure, collaborations, community that brings together research action, that actually builds projects of collaborative research that we really hope that folks at UCSB, graduate students, faculty, everyone in a position to engage in this research joins with us on. So I wanted to turn this over now to Marcos Vargas, who can, has some more to say about why that kind of research matters and what it looks like to folks who are doing the work of social justice on the ground.
Can we move to the first slide, or are you able?
Yes.
Yeah, the one that's just the cover of the report itself. Great. Well, thank you so much, Alice and Charlie. It's really so great to be here. Again, my name is Marcos Vargas. I'm the executive director of the Fund for Santa Barbara. Prior to that, I was a founding executive director and was so for 14 years of the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, or CAUSE. Some of you may be aware of that organization. And I also have my PhD in urban planning from UCLA. And I should mention as well that I'm a graduate of UCSB. And it's just really so exciting to be here, coming kind of full circle. Of course, I don't remember getting lost like when I was an undergraduate here, but now I had a hard time finding the building. But it's so great to be here, and I'm so excited about this initiative. For those of you who are not familiar with the Fund for Santa Barbara, we're a progressive community foundation and regional intermediary serving Santa Barbara and the larger Central Coast region. Our mission is to advance progressive social change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. So for 40 years plus, we've been engaged, the Fund for Santa Barbara has been engaging local community-based social justice organizations, providing grant support, providing capacity building assistance, either through trainings and workshops, but also direct consultation, as well as supporting coalitions and collaboratives, sometimes including co-founding several coalitions and facilitating collaboratives and issue area convenings, utilizing what we sometimes call at the fund our trusted table. And while we've been working with the Plum Center for some time now, and I think back to those wonderful Green New Deal forums that we worked on together, as well as the fact that the fund could not function with all the amazing interns that the Plum Center is directed towards to the fund to achieve our work. But more than ever now, I'm just so excited and proud to have engaged in this partnership with the Plum Center around this important research project and ongoing initiative, the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative. So as Alice mentioned, going back to the beginnings in 2019, for many of us, the original intent of the study and later the initiative was to provide an important research resource to community organizing, policy advocacy efforts in the region. So drawing from my own academic background, as well as my community organizing experience and the fund's many, many years of supporting community-based organizing and policy advocacy, we've been able to witness firsthand the importance of collaborative university and community research to support community organizing and policy advocacy and movement building. One of the best examples I draw from is the living wage movement, including the initiatives that were undertaken here in Ventura and Santa Barbara County, which resulted in the passage of 5 living wage ordinances in our region, but also really built a movement from which to grow from, in not only in economic justice issues, but environmental justice issues, as well as racial justice issues as well. So from that, we learned the importance of community engaged research, where university community engaged research allowed proponents of a living wage to dismiss the shoddy research being done by the primary opponents of a living wage, which were the Chamber of Commerce's. This living wage research included labor market analysis, quantitative research on poverty and income inequality, economic impact of other living wage ordinances passed in other cities and counties, and the documented benefits to employers of a living wage through increased productivity and the reduction in turnover. Another very good example of how community engaged research has had an impact in our region is in the area of environmental justice, where community engaged research has documented the disproportionate health impacts of pesticides and power plants, predominantly on communities of color in our region. Research such as this has been successful in achieving policy reform around stiffening or restricting the regulations on pesticides, and recently having stopped the development of a new power plant in Oxnard, as well in 2007, the halting of the development of a liquefied natural gas terminal off the coast of Oxnard. It was research that was critical to that work, along with a legal strategy and a community organizing strategy that was able to achieve those goals. And in undertaking this impactful community engaged research, I can't emphasize enough the importance of strong collaborative partnerships between community-based organizations and university researchers. I mean, in many ways, this is a challenge, but it's also beautiful because it's something you could build on over time as well, and it can be impactful over years. Kathleen will talk to you a little bit about the fund and what we can do to help support those efforts with university-based research and community-based organizations, given our role as a regional intermediary. Therefore, an important element of many of these and other examples of community-engaged research is how research is structured in the way that university scholars not only collaborate with community groups, but empower community members in shaping the research itself, including methodologies that center the voices of those directly impacted by these issues. Often in these collaboration, community groups also engage university researchers as strategic partners to determine campaign direction, issue framing, and in identifying policy options. So this is really critical. It is a resource that isn't always aptly available in communities, and so it's critical that the universities step up. Ultimately, good community engaged research provides organizations the tools to empower community members to speak truth to power, and thereby bringing about meaningful change that affects their lives. I'm happy to share with you that the regional equity study is already being used by local community activist organizations and community organizing in campaigns around tenants' rights and housing advocacy, affordable housing advocacy. Again, solid community-based or community engaged research can work hand in hand with community organizing, grassroots policy advocacy, as well as legal strategies. I welcome all of us here at the university to consider the possibility of engaging in community-centered or community engaged research, as well as to join us in this incredible initiative that will be with us for a while, because as Al said, we have just begun with this report. The last several months, we've had these briefings in the community and with policymakers and with the philanthropic sector. And there's quite a buzz out there right now, but the action will only take place when we have additional research in collaboration with community-based organizations doing this important organizing and advocacy work. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Kathleen Knight, who is the Director of Capacity Building over the fund, to talk to you a little bit more about the role of the fund and the role that we can play in helping to facilitate and support community engaged research here at the university. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Hello to everybody who's here to join us in person, as well as folks on Zoom. My name is Kathleen Knight, and I'm the Capacity Building Manager with the Fund for Santa Barbara. Prior to my time with the Fund for Santa Barbara, I lived and worked in rural Costa Rica, where I was deeply engaged in a community-based organization born out of activism efforts to protect a river that flows through the town, which was only successful due to the support of university research being able to provide support to the community. Now, as Marcos mentioned, the Fund for Santa Barbara is a non-traditional community funding organization, and we make grants to advocacy-based community groups and nonprofit organizations. Now, beyond our grant-making work, which is a community-engaged process, and also in some cases a youth-led process, we're also deeply engaged in community empowerment and resilience building through our capacity building program. On one level, our capacity building program provides non-monetary resources to community groups, such as workshops, educational training, networking, consulting. But far beyond that, we also are a home for convenings and supporting the growth and the strength of our nonprofits regionally. The Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative framework guides our capacity building work, and more largely the work of the Fund for Santa Barbara. We draw on this framework for equity to inform our grant making, our organizing, and support our role as a regional intermediary. As a result of our deep community engagement through all aspects of our work, the Fund for Santa Barbara acts as a regional intermediary between community organizations, local government, researchers, and businesses. We not only have an intimate understanding of the needs, the goals, and the successes of community groups, but work throughout Santa Barbara, Ventura counties, and soon San Luis Obispo County to advance social justice and equity within our region as a whole. We've served as a trusted table for issue area specific convenings, partnering with various organizations and institutions, including the Plum Center, and facilitated the establishment of various coalitions, including the Central Coast Climate Justice Network, the Central Coast Immigration Network, serving as a trusted table for the criminal justice reform convening, as well as a food justice convening. Now, the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative offers a unique and inclusive framework for advancing equity. It offers the opportunity to actively build a multi-sectoral network and strengthen action-oriented plans for regional change. As we've heard today, it requires for each of us individually, organizationally, and institutionally to understand our strengths and what we bring to the table. It also requires that we examine our own abilities to contribute more deeply to our regional community and understand how we can approach equity from the spaces we're in now. We ask that each of you here reflects on what you can do to contribute to creating a more just and equitable Central Coast, drawing on your strengths, your resources as researchers, as community members, and as participants in the university. The Fund for Santa Barbara is committed to strengthening our work as a regional intermediary, which includes serving as a connective point between community organizations and local researchers, between policymakers and philanthropists, and contributing to building momentum towards regional transformation. We are motivated and strengthened by this community research collaborative partnership with the Plum Center and with UCSB. We see this as an important opportunity to unite our region under a shared vision of regional equity. We invite you to engage with the Fund for Santa Barbara and the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative in connecting to local community organizations who have on-the-ground experience and who have firsthand knowledge not only of the issues faced by communities, but who are already actively working to address these challenges. Community organizations need your support as researchers who can contribute to the success of movement building, providing responsive data that can be an integral part of success in addressing challenges faced by our communities. Both myself and Marcos, on behalf of the Fund for Santa Barbara and in the spirit of partnership with the UCSB Plum Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Democracy, invite you to engage with us in the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative. What does this look like? We encourage you to reach out to us to discuss this initiative and framework further, to collaborate with us to explore the role and responsibility that community-based research plays in building an equitable Central Coast, to utilize the Fund for Santa Barbara's capacity building program to connect with community organizations who are in need of researchers like yourself and important data to back up movement building. We also invite you to help us better understand what you think the significance research and community partnerships can play in advancing equity. And perhaps most importantly, to reflect on what you can contribute to transforming our institutions, our communities, and our region as a whole. We'd also like to invite you to participate in our upcoming series of community engagement sessions to elevate the framework of the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative and underscore the importance of community research partnerships. This will be an opportunity for you to meet directly with community organizations and community members to find common ground in exploring partnership building. This will be a virtual event on Thursday, May 19th from 12 to 1 p.m. with subsequent engagement sessions to follow, and we'll be sure to send that information to you through the Plum Center. I'd now like to turn it over to Diane Fujino. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. This project is kind of all my worlds colliding. I am a professor of Asian American Studies here at UCSB. I work in the Division of Social Sciences and with the Plum Center. I'm a really proud board member of the Fund for Santa Barbara. And I was asked, Alice asked me to speak to a little bit about my research and the ways that it is community engaged, and then to think about projects or to speak to some projects that are possible with this call that's developed, call for proposals to do research on equities and the local community in the Central Coast, the three counties. And I want to say that this study, it's already been said, but I want to say that this study really is a model for demonstrating some of the key principles of community engaged scholarship. For one, it touches on the concept that knowledge is vital to collective action and to social change. And two, that knowledge is co-produced, right, from horizontal partnerships between the academy and communities. And in an ideal world, this means the entire research process from start to finish is done in a collaborative way, right? From developing ideas to thinking about methodologies, to data gathering, to interpreting results, to disseminating results. This is often very aspirational, and yet with this regional equity study, it actually happened in fact. I want to speak just quickly to a couple of projects that I've done that I think are community engaged projects. So one is something that we're doing right now, and it's building on the kind of cooperative economics that are happening in multiple cities across the country. And we're calling our project Cooperation Santa Barbara. And it's an emergent project that's really responding to all of the problems and the austerity stemming from the neoliberal gig economy, and feeling like we need to develop other models of engagement, political economics. And so we're looking to cooperatives and trying to promote both workers and labor reaping the benefits of their work, right? And also increase democratic participation in decision-making and self-governance in the economy. And so we are developing or working to develop in development a health and wellness co-op here in Santa Barbara area. And we have a small research team that is essential to this kind of work that emerges out of activism and out of a desire to develop a consumer co-op to increase access for health and wellness for groups that are too often left out of these kinds of practices. And two, worker co-op, so that practitioners can be paid a living wage and also, develop their own businesses. And so the small research team is vital to this, because this work is quite challenging. It is an activist project, but it also requires doing research into business models, into legal issues, into all kinds of different kinds of work. And so we're really seeing that kind of partnership. And the other project that I've worked on is a project on Asian American activism. And this emerged because in conversations actually with community organizers and with scholar activists over many, many years. And in the recent period, we were just so struck by how invisible Asian American activism remains. And this was a moment, right, in which we had all these vibrant movements for Black lives, Occupy, climate, housing, student debt, abolition, and so forth. And so we gathered academics and activist organizers at UCSB in January of 2019. We did public presentations to try to amplify the work of Asian American activism, and also closed door sessions where people really got to think together and strategize and talk about challenges to organizing in the neoliberal moment and look at the state of Asian American organizing. And out of this convening, we've released an anthology that was published earlier this year that looks at this work, and we're going around doing talks, because just as with this regional equity study, it's not enough to do research and to publish, but there needs to be a dissemination component. And since we're working with organizers, it's a little easier to do, right? Folks know how to do this. I want to talk about this call that you've seen, right? For research on Central Coast equity. And people have already spoken to the kinds of projects that are happening or could happen, right? Charlie spoke to the different faculty research and the ways that they focus on equity, and also the ways that they have or can have a local dimension. Marcos talked about the kind of work around climate and other issues that it was necessary to have a research component linked to an activist component and a public policy component. And I want to just mention just a couple of things that are possible with this. One is housing, right? And this report, and you saw Alice in that slide on the ways that rent burden, we know that there's a housing crisis. In terms of rent burden, Ventura and Santa Barbara are number 5 and number 11 respectively as the most rent burden counties in the country. I mean, this is a serious problem that we're facing. And it's possible to do research, right, into models of alternative models of housing. We really need to be thinking about these: cooperative housing, collective housing, small houses, and also research into policy-driven work to reduce speculation in the housing market, right? Much research is already being done, and much activist work is already being done on community-engaged models for promoting health and welfare, including a promotorum program of Indigenous and Latina migrant workers who are empowering their peers through knowledge and education, support, and access to resources. The climate justice work is happening around the Green New Deal. And so I really encourage you to take up the charge, right, issued by the Dean of Social Science and the Director of the Fund for Santa Barbara and the Director of the Plum Center, to think about engaging in community-based research on structural inequities in the Tri-County region. Thank you.
Okay, so now it's time. I mean, I think there may be questions in this room, but I think Isaac, I don't know. I'm going to ask Isaac to let us know if there's some questions in the chat that we can hear about, so that we can get the Q&A going.
No questions in the chat yet. Why don't we start in the room?
Okay, who's got questions or comments? Anyone who wants to, or any, I welcome discussion about ideas you might have, questions you might have about, how to go about this. Questions you might have about how to reach out to the Fund for Santa Barbara to link up with community groups. Just exchange, again, comment on the study. Any and all questions or comments are welcome. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Selfishly, I'm curious, but I'm thinking others might be interested. Are the conversations with the various stakeholder groups that took place, are those transcribed?
Well, we don't, so the question was, I'm not sure if people online could hear, we did a series of community consultations with diverse groups of people. We recorded, we have not transcribed the exact conversation, but we are actually working on a sort of distilled report from those consultations, yes. And it's a work in progress, as is everything with the community equity study. But I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I really want to emphasize here is that even though the report itself features quantitative indicators in large degree, that is not necessarily, our notion of research that matters is by no means convened to that. After all, I'm a historian. I deeply involved in my own work in contextualized and qualitative, what would be known as qualitative research, but we really welcome research that engages, using all varieties of methodologies. Yes.
I mean, I'm coming from a very different perspective since I do research, and I also taught part-time at Santa Barbara City College. I was also lucky enough to be part of a GK through 12 as a fellow, where I worked in schools for a year in science enrichment as a graduate student. And so my question is, in terms of, for example, educational inequalities here and the problems that we have getting students who are prepared to come into STEM programs here, who are in the BIPOC community. How could we do something to help engage our rich, we have all these faculty, we have all these graduates and postdocs here, and many people want to be more involved. How can we make this connection, for example? Because the GK through 12 I worked with, I went into inner city school twice a week for 2 semesters for a full school year, and worked with 6th and 7th grade classrooms in science enrichment. And it had a huge impact. I mean, it was a visible impact with the students, and they talked about it. Just having somebody come in who was excited to do something with them. I brought in hands-on things that they got to do. And those were kinds of things they've never done. I mean, this was Boston, and most of the kids in my class had never been to the ocean. Okay, because they couldn't afford to do it. Their parents couldn't take them. There's so many opportunities here like that, where students could be getting exposure to the biodiversity here, the varying ecosystems, even just having somebody come in, even just like slides, if you couldn't get them out into the world, and sharing some information about research they're doing here.
Yeah.
It seems like we have so much here that can help enrich the community and help bring students into STEM who may not even understand what opportunities there are for them.
Diane, I think you wanted to to respond to that, but one thing I will say about that, I mean, I see that whole area as rich with possibilities for research, as in, like, let's get a hold of what is going on, because we all, I think anecdotally, many of us have experience of this and can point to, but systematically being able to document how how those inequities happen and what are the basis of it, but also some of like documenting what's worked and what's worked well and why and how. I mean, these are all within the realm of what we would love to facilitate. Yeah, go ahead, Diane.
I wanted to thank you for that, because I think what you're speaking to is the really rich resources in our K-12 and in our community, right, to promote sciences and BIPOC and immigrant communities, right? And there was a project, I think it was called Kids in Nature, that was really linking the university with the community. And there are a few projects like this that have happened, but I think that there are far too many. And I know that from the university end of it, there are people in in the sciences, right, who are deeply concerned about some of these issues. And I would be happy to connect you to some of them, so maybe we can talk after, because it would be lovely to see these partnerships and, you know, in the ways that Alice just mentioned, right, to assess what's happening and then alternative models, right, that are.
Yeah, we need to know what is happening, but also hope we can put together long-term resources to help fix the.
Okay,
Because like, we have the reef here, for example, which is a great opportunity for students to come to schools
Yes.
and learn about science and the animals.
I'm just gonna, I've been informed that the folks online can't hear. Is that correct? Can somebody confirm that?
I can hear.
Oh, you can, okay, okay, never mind.
Carry on.
Never mind.
The teachers in the schools have to be interested to make that happen.
Mhm.
And it seems like we should have more that goes out instead of just referring to it coming in. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, and have it set up so that it is not just available, but it's promoted.
Kathleen?
Yeah, and one thing that I would just like to say in response to that too, is I think that's kind of where an organization like the Fund for Santa Barbara can come in, and why this partnership with the Plum Center has been, and I think will really grow to be something so vital for the region, is that we're very familiar with community organizations working in the region, and particularly in our capacity building program, very cognizant of what their specific needs are as it relates to each organization, or even centered on issue area specific topics. So I would really encourage, Diane is very well connected between what's going on at the university level with researchers and also what's going on within our community. But I would say really trying to find ways in which we can connect, and this Fund for Santa Barbara can serve as that intermediary to help facilitate those partnerships. Because as we're sitting here thinking, just off the top of my head, I'm like, oh, I can think of like 5 community organizations who would love to and have expressed interest in having researchers or science and more of that kind of foundational knowledge incorporated into their programs.
Yeah.
So we'd be happy to talk with you after as well.
Yeah, I actually wanted to pick up on that and other points that you made too, just in terms of the connections. Community-based organizations are already doing a lot of research, and I think that's something that is often not entirely recognized from academic researchers, and many of them have active research programs. And in fact, one of the great possibilities and avenues for learning on the part of university-based researchers is to see the kind of research that they are doing, which isn't to say that they say, oh, we've got a line on this, we don't need help, but they kind of know what they know what they need. And again, many of them are already engaged in research. I will say, from the Plum Center perspective, through our minor in poverty, inequality, and social justice, a number of students go out to work as interns for community-based organizations, and they have them doing local level, often ethnographic research, and they're getting training on the site. But that it is training and research that can always be enhanced by a partnership with the university. Yeah. Are there other questions?
Yes. I was just going to say, first off, Alice, if you wouldn't mind repeating questions from the audience, just so that it's easier for the Zoom audience to hear them, that would be wonderful, or just a little summary. And then the second question I have is from me, actually, a little bit leading. Speaking of collaborations with the community and support for that, where can people go, perhaps online, if they want to learn more about the call for proposals?
They can go to the Plum Center website. It is both on the landing page and on the research page. We have sent out actually, and we'll get the dean's office to send out another blast through their networks. We've used many, I think some people in this room have probably gotten multiple versions of this, because we're using email connections, distribution networks, and social media networks. We can probably, we will post it on the Central Coast Regional Equity website. And we're open to suggestion. Yeah, and Maria, did you have a?
maybe Isaac could just post, could paste into the chat the website. for-
Isaac, did you hear that? Can you post the website?
Already did that.
Okay, okay.
Charlie's.
I wanted to just follow up on this question of the community consultations and also the making use of this amazing collaboration that, has been developed. And it also has to do with the fact that when I was more active doing research, I always did ethnography, in person, on the ground kind of participant observation kind of work. And sometimes the quantitative overviews that we get, like in the regional active study, sometimes they'll turn up enigmas or questions, things that you can't quite understand. Like why is this group particularly disadvantaged in this way, and or just things that you feel like you can't really get to the bottom of it without some of the things. Inequality, it's just there, it's in your face. It's not, but there's nuances that I'm wondering if through the consultations or in your poring over this data, whether there's some puzzles that you ended up with that you want to kind of throw out and challenge the researchers to kind of engage. Is there something that the study produced that wasn't conclusive or was left a question hanging?
Or invites further, yeah, I mean, so,
Deeper
here's one that I would point to, because I felt that it was really eye-opening, and partly it did resonate with, I mentioned it before, it resonated with my experience teaching during the pandemic. Just the degree to which, we know in the abstract about the digital divide, we hear about the digital divide a lot, and it's become a thing that we refer to all the time, but I don't think I fully appreciated the meaning and significance of the digital divide, A, until I taught during the pandemic, but B, also, this was one of the big themes that came from the community consultations, where people said, absolutely, it's about education, but it's about so much more.
Mhm.
And they started to talk about their concerns about social isolation, for example. I think an under-examined dimension of how inequality works and is, reinforced, and who gets affected, and that brings up all sorts of issues about language access, and so many things on it. So that's one whole area that I think. I mean, frankly, the other two other things that came up to us, this question of what is a social infrastructure? What does it mean? Why do community bonds actually matter in making things work and in dealing with inequality? Because one of another big themes that came out of these consultations during the time of pandemic is, how is this experience affecting our entire social infrastructure, whether it has to do with services, organizing, just outreach, just checking on your neighbor, a dimension of social experience, but also inequality that you can just see when you hear it. Boy, do we have the capacity in this iteration of the study to get into this? No, we don't, but we must. I guess the other thing, real quick, the generational dynamics dimensions of all of this, that to me is huge, and I think it has a lot to do with perceptions as much as anything else, because I feel that we have a generation, I don't know what kind of boundaries to put around it, but a generation that is really positioned to push for transformative change, because they are through with this experience of escalating inequality and how it is making basic security completely out of reach for them. And somehow they're supposed to accept a bill of goods about what life is supposed to be like. So those are just three things that, came up in the community consultation that warrant further research, but there may be some others.
There's many.
Yeah, yes, there are so many.
As you mentioned
The
earlier.
K through 12 education and the dynamics of funding. I mean, that really, I invite anybody in the room to come to us to say, if you want to help us take this on, because this comes up over and over again. And we felt, boy, we don't have the bandwidth to take this issue on, but it really needs to be addressed systematically. Yeah. Isaac, we have a few minutes left. Are there other questions in the chat? I feel like we need to make the people on Zoom work since they didn't have the gumption to show up. We should probably put the camera on all the good students. Yes, please. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sandy. I'm a PhD student at the Brand School, and I came for the call for proposal. And I think this is great work, and I just have a few questions. So I'm just adding on to another margin of inequality. So basically, my work looks at the impacts of drought on different pollution burdens, such as air and water pollution. And I look at the whole of California, and I find huge like racial inequities. So basically my paper is not published yet, so don't say anything. When drought happens, is water quality, drinking water quality worsens. But I find that if you just look at whole California, there's no effect. I see that there's only if you look at low-income rural farming communities, they have really worsening water quality in response to drought. And that translates to what health and different birth outcomes, and also increasing costs because they buy bottled water. And because of this proposal, I was thinking maybe I can zoom the lens in and just look at the Central Coast area. And I haven't done that yet, but I think that because my work just employs sort of like large data set, I grab like satellite data, monitoring data. It kind of lacks that activists and sort of the collaborative component that I think is part of this proposal. So I think I'm interested in like how can I introduce that dimension into my research, and also what if I would give you this proposal, what would you recommend I do so that it can sort of fulfill that element of it as well?
Of community engagement. I'm already thinking, this is a question from Sandy, is it?
Yes.
Who is a student in the Brem School who's doing research on the disparate impacts of drought on rural communities, but on communities of color, generally speaking, thinking about bringing in a regional component. I mean, I can think of many community-based organizations who would be really interested in this research, and I'm going to point to my friends from the Fund for Santa Barbara and making some of those connections. But I'm also the other thing that would be fantastic about this is that it takes advantage of the fact that the region we are dealing with combines rural and urban, and I mean, a lot of these equity studies have been that, don't really get into the dynamics of inequality between rural and urban and in rural communities. So I think I think there are a lot of possibilities, and I can imagine that community-based groups would be open to having that sort of big satellite view of things. So we'll have to follow up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe
Yes.
attend some of these engagement sessions
absolutely.
that we're going to have.
Yes.
Can I just add in that people should weigh in and disagree with me, those of us who have worked on the call, that not only do you want to consider the ways that you might be able to collect data from the region, I mean, this is kind of what Alice was getting at, but also even if you have data that maybe isn't collected from the region or isn't exclusively collected from the region, but that you think could, the results of which could inform change in the region, right? That
Yes.
just having the knowledge that you've collected from across the state could be, written up or displayed in a way. You could think of, I think, interesting and creative ways to help take your data that's collected more broadly and impact the region, right?
Yes.
That's also a way to think about tying it to regional impact. So I don't think it just has to be at the data collection stage necessarily.
Yes.
All right. Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
I hope people in the Zoom room heard that.
I was trying to talk loud.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think we are coming close to our end time, but Isaac, are there any other questions?
No questions. A very nice comment from Ralph Ambruster Sandoval in the chat saying, thank you all for doing this work. Been a dream for so many organizations and folks for a generation to do work like this, collaborating with Fund for Santa Barbara, UCSB, and so much more. Incredible, really, adelante.
Okay, so Ralph, we expect to hear from you. Really, please, if you have questions, you know, Isaac isn't going to be an important point person. Kathleen at the Fund for Santa Barbara, I mean, and Keisha and I mean, we can navigate questions that come to us, but really and truly, we hope to hear and see some proposals so that we can get this thing going. Good to see you all virtually. It is a little bit of a strange experience. And now we are all gonna drink and be merry, and you can go off to your cubbies and carry on. Okay, thanks to everybody.